Karen's fingers trembled as she dialed the number she'd memorized years ago. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Jameson and Associates, this is Rebecca. Rebecca, it's Karen Hendricks. I need to speak with Marcus immediately. Oh, Mrs. Hendricks, how are the violations going? Still keeping those neighbors in line. If only she knew, Karen thought bitterly. Something like that. Is Marcus available? 20 minutes later, Karen sat across from Marcus Jameson, the attorney who'd helped her draft dozens of violation notices over the years. His office smelled of leather and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the chaos in Karen's mind. Let me get this straight, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. You destroyed HOA property because they voted you out. They didn't just vote me out, Karen snapped. They're systematically undoing everything I've accomplished. Do you know what I found when I went through their new bylaws? They're allowing lawn ornaments, Marcus. Lawn ornaments. And don't get me started on their new paint color policy. Marcus pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes. Karen, I've known you for 3 years. You're passionate about community standards, but nothing, Karen interrupted. I have evidence that their election was fraudulent. David Chen from Oakwood Drive? He moved in 2 weeks after the voting deadline, but somehow his ballot was counted. And Jennifer Walsh hasn't lived in her house for 6 months. She's been in Florida caring for her mother. That's actually interesting, Marcus admitted, his pen moving faster across the page. Do you have documentation? Karen opened her tablet and pulled up a meticulously organized spreadsheet. I've been tracking every resident's move-in date, voting eligibility, and attendance at HOA meetings for the past 3 years. Look at this. As Marcus reviewed her data, Karen felt a familiar rush of satisfaction. This was what she did best: attention to detail, thorough documentation, and unwavering commitment to the rules. My God, Karen, Marcus whispered, scrolling through screen after screen of data. You've been keeping records on everyone? Someone had to, she replied defensively. The previous board was lazy. They let people get away with everything. This is, Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. This is either the most thorough community documentation I've ever seen, or evidence of some very concerning behavior. Karen's face flushed. What's that supposed to mean? Karen, some of this information is incredibly personal. You have records of people's work schedules, their visitors, even their medical appointments based on observing patterns in their driveways. The accusation stung because it was true. Karen had always justified her surveillance as community safety, but seeing it laid out in black and white made her question her own motives for the first time. I was protecting property values, she said quietly. Were you, or were you trying to control people? The question hung between them like a challenge. Karen had built her identity around being the person who kept Willowbrook Estates perfect, but what if her version of perfect was actually a prison? Can you help me or not? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus closed the tablet and leaned forward. I can help you with the criminal charges. That's straightforward. But Karen, if you're serious about challenging the HOA election, you need to understand something. This kind of legal battle could expose all of this. He gestured at the tablet. Are you prepared for your neighbors to know exactly how closely you've been watching them? Karen's mouth went dry. She'd never considered that her carefully compiled evidence could be turned against her. In her mind, she'd been the hero of her own story. But what if everyone else saw her as the villain? What are my options? She asked. Plead guilty to the vandalism charge, pay the fine, and walk away. Start fresh somewhere else. Or fight both battles and risk losing everything, your reputation, your money, and possibly your freedom if more charges come up. Karen stared out the window at the city beyond, thinking about the life she'd built in Willowbrook Estates. Every perfectly manicured lawn, every regulation-compliant mailbox, every violation notice she'd issued, it all added up to something that had given her purpose. I need time to think, she said finally. Karen, Marcus called as she reached the door. Whatever you decide, be careful. The person I'm seeing today isn't the same composed woman who used to sit in my office discussing violation procedures. Make sure you're fighting for the right reasons. As Karen walked to her car, she caught her reflection in the office building's glass doors. For the first time in years, she didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. The satisfying crack of stone against metal echoed through Willowbrook Estates as Karen Hendricks brought the decorative garden rock down on the freshly installed HOA sign for the third time. She didn't notice the unmarked police cruiser parked just beyond the oak trees, or Officer Martinez adjusting his dash cam for a better angle. "Take that, you pretentious piece off." Karen's victory dance was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps on gravel. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put the rock down." Karen spun around, her perfectly styled blonde bob whipping across her face as she came face to face with a stern-looking officer. The color drained from her cheeks, but her grip on the rock remained firm. "This is private property," she stammered, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone she perfected during countless HOA meetings. "I have every right to be here." Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow, glancing at the dented sign that now read, "Wulai LOVEASTTES 2019, thanks to Karen's handiwork. And you have the right to destroy community property." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Karen had been the unofficial queen of Willowbrook Estates for 3 years, serving as the self-appointed enforcer of community standards. She issued more violation notices than anyone in the development's history, from lawn height infractions to unauthorized holiday decorations. But this morning, everything had changed. It started with the letter, a crisp official notice from the newly elected HOA board informing her that her services were no longer required. 24 hours later, they'd installed this monstrosity right in front of her house, complete with new rules that directly contradicted everything she'd spent years implementing. "Officer, you don't understand," Karen began, her voice cracking slightly as she set the rock down. "I built this community. I made it what it is today. They can't just." "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." As Karen fumbled through her designer purse, her mind raced. She'd never been in trouble with the law before. Her biggest transgression had been a parking ticket she'd successfully appealed 3 years ago. But looking at the damaged sign, she realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "Karen Hendricks," she said, handing over her license with trembling fingers. "I live at 1247 Maple Ridge Lane." The officer studied her ID, then looked back at the sign. "Mrs. Hendricks, I'm going to have to cite you for vandalism. The property damage appears to be several $100s. "Several hundred?" Karen's voice pitched higher. "It's just a cheap aluminum sign." "Custom signs aren't cheap, ma'am. Plus, there's the matter of the security camera." Karen's blood ran cold. "Security camera?" Officer Martinez pointed to a small, nearly invisible device mounted on the lamppost across the street. "The HOA installed them last week. Everything you did this morning is on video." The weight of her actions began to settle in. This wasn't just about a citation anymore. This was evidence of a crime. As the officer filled out the paperwork, Karen stared at the destroyed sign, wondering how her perfect life had unraveled so quickly. "I'll need you to appear in court on this date," Officer Martinez said, handing her the citation. "And Mrs. Hendricks, maybe consider talking to the HOA board before taking matters into your own hands next time." As the police cruiser disappeared around the corner, Karen stood alone in the morning sun, clutching a piece of paper that could change everything. But instead of fear, she felt something unexpected: determination. If the new board wanted a war, she'd give them one they'd never forget. The courtroom was smaller than Karen had expected, with harsh fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. She sat rigidly in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, watching as case after case was called before hers. Each time the bailiff announced another name, her heart rate quickened. "Karen Hendricks, case number 2025 DD 4721. Marcus squeezed her shoulder as she stood on unsteady legs. "Remember what we discussed," he whispered. The walk to the defendant's table felt like a mile. As she sat down, Karen noticed the prosecutor, a young woman who looked barely out of law school, shuffling through papers with casual confidence. This was probably just another routine case for her, but for Karen, it represented the complete upheaval of her carefully constructed life. Your Honor, the prosecutor began. The defendant willfully destroyed community property valued at $847. We have video evidence of the crime, and the defendant admitted to the destruction when confronted by police. Judge Rodriguez, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, reviewed the file. Ms. Hendricks, how do you plead? Karen stood slowly, her voice catching in her throat. Not guilty, Your Honor. The prosecutor looked surprised. Your Honor, as I mentioned, we have clear video evidence. I understand, Judge Rodriguez interrupted. Mr. Jameson, I assume you'd like to present your client's case. Marcus rose confidently. Your Honor, my client's actions, while regrettable, were the result of significant provocation and fraud within the HOA election process. We like to present evidence that the board that installed this sign was illegally elected. For the next hour, Karen watched as her meticulously compiled data was presented to the court. Every spreadsheet, every timeline, every carefully documented violation of HOA procedures was laid out like pieces of a puzzle. But as the evidence mounted, Karen began to see something she'd missed before. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal but fair. Mrs. Hendricks, you documented that Mr. Patterson's garbage cans were left out past the designated time on 17 occasions over 2 years. Is that correct? Yes, Karen replied. And you recorded the times Mrs. Chen's teenage son came home each night for 6 months because you suspected he was violating quiet hours? Karen's cheeks burned. I was concerned about community standards. You also noted that the Martinez family had excessive visitors during their daughter's birthday party, defining excessive as more than 8 cars for a child's birthday party. The weight of her own words pressed down on her like a physical force. In her mind, she'd been protecting the community, but hearing it read aloud in a courtroom made her realize how her behavior might have looked to others. Judge Rodriguez called for a recess, and Karen found herself alone with Marcus in the hallway. This isn't going well, she said, her voice barely audible. Actually, it is, Marcus replied. The judge is seeing exactly what we want her to see, that you are operating under extreme stress caused by your obsession with community perfection. It's not an excuse, but it's context. Obsession? Karen repeated. Is that what you think this was? Marcus studied her face carefully. Karen, when's the last time you took a vacation? When's the last time you had friends over who weren't HOA board members? When's the last time you did something just for fun? The questions hit her like physical blows. She couldn't remember the last time she'd done any of those things. Every waking moment for the past 3 years had been consumed with monitoring, documenting, and enforcing rules. When court resumed, Judge Rodriguez delivered her verdict with measured precision. Ms. Hendricks, you're guilty of property destruction. However, given the unusual circumstances and your lack of prior criminal history, I'm ordering community service, 60 hours of volunteer work with a local housing assistance program. You'll learn what it's like to help people instead of policing them. Additionally, the judge continued, I'm ordering both parties to participate in mediation to resolve the HOA dispute. Mr. Jameson, your evidence suggests there were irregularities in the election process, but Ms. Hendricks' response was entirely inappropriate. As they left the courthouse, Karen felt simultaneously relieved and empty. She'd avoided jail time, but the victory felt hollow. So what happens now? She asked Marcus as they reached the parking garage. Now you figure out who you want to be, he replied. The community service will be good for you. And Karen, consider this a chance to start over. Driving home through Willowbrook Estates, Karen noticed things she'd never seen before. A young father teaching his daughter to ride a bike in a driveway. An elderly woman tending to a garden that, while not perfectly manicured, was clearly loved. Children drawing with chalk on a sidewalk, their laughter echoing between the houses. For 3 years, she'd seen only violations and infractions. But these people weren't problems to be solved. They were neighbors trying to build a life. As she pulled into her driveway, Karen noticed something that made her heart stop. Taped to her front door was an envelope with Notice of Violation written in familiar block letters. With shaking hands, she opened it and read, Dear Ms. Hendricks, Your lawn height exceeds community standards by 0.5 inches. Please remedy this violation within 48 hours or face a $75 fine. Signed, the new HOA board. Karen stared at the notice, then at her lawn, which looked identical to every other lawn on the street. For the first time in 3 years, she laughed. A genuine, uncontrolled laugh that brought tears to her eyes. The new board was using her own playbook against her, but instead of rage, she felt something unexpected, understanding. She finally knew exactly how her neighbors had felt receiving her notices. As she walked to her mailbox, Karen noticed a new car parked across the street. Inside, a woman with a tablet was photographing her house, documenting something for reasons Karen could only imagine. The cycle was beginning again, but this time, Karen had a choice to make. She waved at the woman in the car, who quickly looked away and drove off. Then Karen walked inside, opened her laptop, and began typing an email to the HOA board, not a complaint or a legal threat, but an invitation to coffee. Some battles, she realized, were worth losing if it meant finding a better way to win.